Hello everyone, and welcome back to Creepy Mr. Night. I know many of you enjoy using these videos to help you sleep, so before you drift off, I thought it'd be fun for everyone to leave a comment, letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy the content. Now, let's get comfy, relax, and begin. Story 1. It was the dead of night when Malcolm Graves, the most notorious serial killer the world had ever known, disappeared from the highest security prison in the country. Blackthorn Prison had long been considered escape-proof, its walls reinforced with steel, its surveillance system a network of cameras that covered every inch of the facility, its guards some of the most experienced in the country. Yet, Graves had managed to vanish without a trace. The alarm was raised at 6 a.m. when Officer Michaels, the overnight guard on duty, began his rounds. He passed by Graves's cell, number 73, where the killer had been kept in solitary confinement for years. The cell door was locked, the lights dim, as usual, the shadows of the barred window stretching across the cold stone walls. Michaels moved along, his flashlight scanning every corner, confirming everything was as it should be. Graves was still locked inside, but when Michaels returned to make his second round, he was greeted by the sight of an empty cell. The cot, still bolted to the floor, had no signs of disturbance. The walls, no cracks. The door, still locked. Panic set in immediately. The cell was thoroughly checked. No tunnels, no broken locks, no hidden passages. The security footage showed no signs of malfunction. For a brief moment, it seemed as though time itself had stopped. How could a man like Graves disappear from a place that was supposed to be impenetrable? Graves wasn't just any prisoner. He was a symbol of fear, the mastermind behind a decade-long killing spree that had terrorized the city. A master manipulator, he was a puzzle no one could crack. His escape meant more than just a breach of security. It meant chaos. A new chapter in his twisted story was beginning, and no one knew where it would lead. Detective Elena Moore stared at the photograph on her desk. A young girl with blonde hair, bright eyes, and a smile that could light up a room. She pushed the memory aside as her phone rang. The shrill sound cut through her thoughts like a knife. Elena Moore, she answered, her voice steady, despite the rush of adrenaline in her veins. Elena, it's Captain Harris. We need you. Graves has escaped. She felt a chill run down her spine. The mention of Graves's name always had that effect on her, even after all these years. She'd been part of the task force that had brought him to justice, back when the world had believed that his reign of terror was finally over. But now, it seemed as though the nightmare was just beginning again. "I'm on my way," she said, ending the call without hesitation. The air was thick with tension as Elena arrived at Blackthorn Prison. The scene outside was chaotic, guards rushing around, officers shouting orders, and prison administrators in heated discussions. The warden, Charles Hargrove, was already waiting for her, his face pale, his hands trembling. "Elena, I don't understand it. There's no explanation. The security footage is clean. The doors were locked. How the hell did he get out?" Hargrove's voice cracked, his composure slipping as the gravity of the situation sank in. "I need access to everything. Surveillance footage, records, anything that might give us a clue. We're dealing with something bigger than just an escape," Elena said, her mind already piecing together the possibilities. Graves was no ordinary man. His mind was as dangerous as the weapons he had wielded during his killing spree. He was the type who could manipulate his environment, who could turn even the most secure place into a trap. It wouldn't surprise her if his escape had been carefully orchestrated from within. The idea that someone in the prison was working with him gnawed at her. But who? As the investigation began, Elena's thoughts turned to the most important question. How did Malcolm Graves escape from a prison designed to keep him locked away forever? The prison's internal security systems were top-notch. State-of-the-art cameras, biometric scanners, and high-tech motion sensors. Elena studied the footage, her eyes darting across the screens. Nothing unusual. Graves was present during every check-in. The guards had performed their rounds, the cells remained locked, and the cameras never lost sight of Graves. Except, of course, when they should have. There's something off about this, Elena muttered to herself as she rewound the footage again. The moments were too perfect, too precise. Every time Graves was due for a check, he was always accounted for. But in the moments between checks, there was nothing. No glitches in the system, no anomalies, just the ticking of the clock. Elena, come take a look at this, Officer Michaels called from the back room. He looked even more disheveled now, his uniform crumpled, his eyes wide with the look of a man who had seen something he couldn't explain. Elena walked over, her boots echoing in the silence as she approached the officer's desk. Michaels was watching the footage, his finger paused on the screen. Look, he said, pointing to the time code. Graves is in his cell here. We know that. But when I came back to check on him, this. On the screen was a section of footage that had been captured by a security camera just outside of Graves's cell. At exactly 3:42 a.m., the video showed a sudden, unnatural stillness in the hallway, followed by a subtle flicker, an almost imperceptible glitch. Then, the screen cut to black for several seconds. That's it, Elena said, her voice low. That's when it happened. Graves escaped in those seconds, Michaels added, his voice barely above a whisper. But there's no sign of him on any other footage. Elena's mind raced. What was Graves doing in that moment? How did he manipulate the system? The idea that he had planned this all along, that he had anticipated the gaps in the surveillance, the weak spots in the system, sent a shiver down her spine. 3 days had passed since Graves's disappearance, and already the city was on edge. Every news outlet was reporting the story. Rumors swirled about possible accomplices, about potential hiding places, but no one knew where he was. No one knew if he was still in the city, or if he'd fled far beyond. As Elena sat in her office, sifting through the case files, a knock on the door broke her concentration. It was Detective Thomas, a younger cop who had been working the case with her since Graves's capture. I think you'll want to see this, Thomas said, holding up an envelope that had been dropped off at the precinct earlier that morning. Inside was a single piece of paper, blank, except for a single line of text, written in neat, precise handwriting. The game has only just begun. Elena stared at the message. Graves was playing a game with them, she realized. A game that had only just started. As Elena followed the trail of clues left behind by Graves, things began to unravel quickly. She discovered discrepancies in the prison's records, files that had been altered, staff members who seemed to have no explanation for their actions during the time of Graves's escape. One name kept cropping up, Officer Michaels. Michaels had been one of the last to see Graves. He had reported the escape, but there were inconsistencies in his story. He'd been at the prison for over 10 years, but something about his behavior was off. Elena decided to take a closer look. She visited Michael's home, but when she arrived, she found it empty. The door was unlocked. Inside, she found a small handwritten note on the kitchen counter, which read, I did what I had to do. The game is bigger than you think. Elena's stomach tightened. This wasn't just an escape. This was something far more dangerous. As the investigation deepened, Elena uncovered the disturbing truth about Graves's influence. He had connections everywhere. His reach extended far beyond Blackthorn. Powerful people had been working with him for years, protecting him, even orchestrating his escape. But who? Who was working with him from the inside? The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place. Elena knew she was getting closer, but with every step she took, Graves's presence seemed to be everywhere. His messages, his traps, each one more twisted than the last. Elena had to confront him. But where was he? Would she be ready when the final showdown came? In the final confrontation, Elena faced Graves once more. But this time, the stakes were higher. This time, everything was at risk. The air in the underground auction house was thick with anticipation, as if the very walls held their breath. Low murmurings echoed off the cold stone floors, a quiet hum that reverberated through the crowd of dangerous and wealthy individuals that had gathered. There were no windows in the dimly lit room, no signs of the outside world, only the faintest traces of light spilling from the chandelier overhead, casting long shadows on the gathering of the powerful and corrupt. At the center of it all stood a small black velvet cushion, upon which rested the object of this deadly auction, the cursed necklace. It gleamed under the chandelier, an unholy relic that had been passed down through centuries, its dark history only whispered about in certain circles. Its legend was well known to those who had heard the tales. Every owner of the necklace met a tragic or violent end. It was said to bring not just death, but despair, ruining lives in its wake. For centuries, the necklace had disappeared into the hands of kings, queens, criminals, and the elite. Yet each time it reappeared, a new owner was claimed by the curse. Victims whose deaths were as mysterious as they were brutal. No one knew how the necklace had come into existence, only that its power was undeniable, and its dark energy infected anyone who dared to possess it. Among the crowd in the auction house, a man named Thomas Avery stood quietly at the back. His sharp eyes were fixated on the necklace. It was said that the cursed necklace had claimed the life of his younger sister, Clara, 15 years ago. Clara had been an up-and-coming journalist, just like Thomas, but her search for the truth about the necklace had led her to her death. Thomas had spent years mourning her loss, trying to uncover the truth behind her mysterious murder. Now, standing in this darkened auction hall, the bitter taste of revenge mingled with his thirst for answers. As the auction began, a hushed silence fell over the room. The auctioneer, a man who exuded an air of authority and wealth, his sharp features framed by an expensive suit, stepped forward and raised his hand, signaling the start of the bidding. "The cursed necklace," he began, his voice smooth and practiced, an artifact of unimaginable power, woven into the very fabric of history. For centuries, it has been sought by kings, thieves, and adventurers alike, yet it has never been owned without consequence. The necklace has been linked to tragedy, and tonight, it is yours for the taking. Let the bidding begin. The first bid came from a man at the front, a tall, imposing figure with a reputation for dealing in the world's darkest treasures. His name was Victor Kalin, a notorious arms dealer, rumored to have ties to a shadowy network of warlords. His eyes glinted with greed, and his voice was low, commanding. "5 million, he said, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. A murmur spread through the crowd, and other bidders followed suit, raising their own stakes. As the bids climbed higher, Thomas felt the air grow heavier, as if something unseen was watching, waiting. His fingers tightened around the small notebook in his pocket, a journal containing the fragmented notes from Clara's investigation. He had spent years piecing together her findings, desperate to understand what had happened to her, and why she had been drawn to the necklace in the first place. But he had no time for memories now, not when the bidding reached $10 million. The auctioneer looked out at the room, his gaze moving from one bidder to the next, sensing the growing tension. 10 million once, the auctioneer called. 10 million twice. The room fell silent as a figure in the back of the room stood, his face hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat and a long, dark coat. His voice was eerily calm as he placed his bid. 20 million. A chill ran through the room. The other bidders faltered for a moment, and then, one by one, they began to retreat. But Kalen, driven by greed, would not back down. The two men stared at each other, locked in a silent battle. But then, just as the auctioneer was about to call the next bid, the lights flickered, plunging the room into darkness. Gasps of shock rippled through the crowd, and then, as if summoned by some unseen force, the lights returned, flickering once more, and then stabilizing. But in that brief moment of chaos, something had changed. Victor Kalen was gone. There was no trace of him. His chair was empty, his bid unclaimed. Panic rippled through the room. The auctioneer's voice faltered as he called for order, but the unsettling silence in the room seemed to deepen with each passing second. A low voice echoed in the distance, breaking the stillness. What happened to him? The chilling realization swept over the crowd. No one had seen Kalen leave, but he was undeniably gone. And the cursed necklace still rested upon its velvet cushion, waiting for its next owner. Thomas, heart racing, glanced around the room. This wasn't just a robbery. This was something far darker. The necklace wasn't just an artifact. It was a harbinger of death, and the curse was already at work. The disappearance of Victor Kalen was only the beginning. As the room buzzed with uneasy whispers, the auctioneer quickly regained his composure, though his face was pale. He attempted to continue, calling for another round of bids, but the crowd was shaken, a sense of unease spreading like wildfire through the room. Thomas Avery, though equally startled, was the first to rise from his seat, his instincts already guiding him through the chaos. He moved toward the center of the room, trying to blend into the background while his mind raced. Kalen had been a monster, a man with a reputation for ruthlessness, but even so, his sudden and complete disappearance felt unnatural. This wasn't just a matter of business gone awry. The curse was real, and it had claimed its first victim of the night. But how? The room had been filled with people when the lights went out, and Kalen had not been seen leaving. No one had heard any sounds of struggle. In fact, it was as though he had simply vanished into thin air. That feeling of an unseen presence, of something watching them all, grew more palpable with each passing second. The auctioneer, trying to regain control, finally addressed the crowd in a trembling voice. Ladies and gentlemen, it seems we have experienced a momentary disruption. But rest assured, the auction will continue. We will proceed with the sale of this unique and valuable item. But Thomas was no longer listening. His gaze was locked on the cursed necklace, its dark gleam under the light sending a shiver up his spine. That was when he saw it. The faintest flicker of movement, a shadow passing across the velvet cushion, as though the necklace itself were somehow alive. His breath caught in his throat. This wasn't just an artifact. It was something far more dangerous. A few minutes passed, but the room felt far longer. The bidders were starting to murmur amongst themselves, clearly unnerved. Some were eyeing the door, others were pacing nervously. But no one spoke of Kaylin, and no one dared to voice what everyone was thinking, that the curse was real, and it had claimed its first victim of the night. Thomas could feel his pulse quicken. He had to get closer, see the necklace up close, feel the weight of it in his hands. He wasn't going to let another person fall prey to the necklace's curse, not when he had the chance to uncover its true nature. He had spent years following the breadcrumbs his sister Clara had left behind before her death, and now it was time to finish what she had started. Hours later, the auction came to a premature close. Kaylin's absence had cast a dark cloud over the proceedings, and the remaining bidders were more cautious, some even leaving the moment the last item was sold, a lesser artifact that, for all intents and purposes, felt insignificant next to the cursed necklace. As the crowd dispersed, Thomas stayed behind, his eyes locked on the lone object, still on its velvet cushion. He couldn't leave now, not when he was so close. He knew that someone, somewhere, would stop at nothing to claim the necklace for themselves, and he was determined to prevent it from happening again. The auction house emptied, and the flickering lights made the shadows dance on the walls. Thomas moved toward the stage where the necklace lay, his fingers twitching as he reached for it. Just as he did, a voice rang out behind him. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." Thomas spun around, startled. Standing in the doorway was a woman, a tall, striking figure dressed in black. Her dark hair fell in loose waves over her shoulders, and her eyes were a piercing shade of blue that seemed to see straight through him. She had the look of someone accustomed to power, someone who knew things that others did not. "Who are you?" Thomas demanded, trying to keep his voice steady, despite the chill running down his spine. The woman didn't immediately answer. Instead, she stepped forward, her gaze never leaving the necklace. "That necklace is dangerous," she said, her voice low and measured, almost a whisper. "More dangerous than you can possibly imagine. And if you take it, you'll be the next one to vanish." Thomas frowned, but there was no dismissing the unease that stirred in his chest. "You think I don't know that?" he replied, his hand hovering over the necklace. "I'm not afraid of a cursed trinket." She chuckled darkly. "It's not the necklace you should fear. It's the people who want it. You're playing a game that's been going on for centuries, and you're far too late to stop it now." Her words stung like a warning, but Thomas didn't back down. He had spent far too long chasing this story to let anyone, or anything, stop him now. He moved toward the necklace, his fingers grazing the cold metal. "I'm not leaving without answers." "Then you'll die with them," the woman said, her voice barely above a murmur. Before he could react, the lights flickered again, this time dimming to an eerie twilight. The room seemed to close in around them. A sudden coldness filled the air. Thomas could hear his heart hammering in his chest as the silence stretched longer than it should. And then, as quickly as it had started, everything went still. The lights flickered one last time, and then returned to their normal brightness. The woman was gone, as though she had never been there. Thomas stood in the center of the room, his breath shallow, and the necklace now lying cold in his hand. The next morning, Thomas found himself at the edge of a spiraling nightmare. News reports flooded the airwaves about a string of mysterious disappearances tied to the cursed necklace. Kaylin was just the beginning. Now, others were vanishing, one by one, leaving behind nothing but a trail of bloodshed and confusion. The woman's words rang in his ears. "If you take it, you'll be the next to vanish." But Thomas had already made his decision. The quest for answers had already consumed him, and the dark allure of the necklace was like a magnet pulling him deeper into the mystery. But now, He had to face something far more dangerous: the powerful figures behind the auction. Someone would stop at nothing to reclaim the cursed relic, and they would do whatever it took to silence him. The investigation had only just begun. Days had passed since the auction, and Thomas Avery found himself on a path that was both terrifying and addictive. He had the cursed necklace now, the very artifact that had driven his sister to madness and death. The necklace was no longer just a relic of the past. It was a tangible presence, its dark energy pulsing in his hands. The whispers in his head grew louder, more insistent, urging him to look closer, to understand its true power. Yet every step he took toward uncovering the truth seemed to come with a cost. The world around him felt unstable, like the very ground he walked on might crumble at any moment. Something was watching him, something much older and more dangerous than he had ever realized. The woman who had warned him, the one who had appeared so suddenly at the auction house, haunted him. Her cryptic words echoed in his mind: "You'll die with the answers." But Thomas wasn't someone who could turn away from a mystery, especially one that had taken so much from him. And so, he found himself sitting at his desk late one evening, the cursed necklace lying in front of him. His fingers trembled as he pulled open the leather-bound journal Clara had left behind. Clara's notes were frantic, her handwriting increasingly erratic as the weeks passed. She had been drawn to the necklace after hearing rumors of its existence during an investigation into a series of brutal deaths connected to an elite underground society, those who had gone missing after coming into possession of cursed artifacts. Thomas scanned the pages, his heart pounding as he read her final entries. May 12, 2009. The necklace is more than a piece of jewelry. It's a key. I believe the curse it carries is not just some myth or superstition, but a force that has been hidden for centuries. It is said to belong to a powerful family, a family whose name has been erased from history, but their legacy remains. May 15, 2009. The necklace has been passed down through generations, from one leader to the next. Each owner dies violently, but it's not just their bodies that perish. Their minds unravel. Their souls are consumed. They become shells of their former selves. The power behind the necklace isn't just a curse. It's a manipulation, a way to control and destroy those who wear it. May 20th, 2009. I'm starting to see things. I know I'm being watched. The moment I took the necklace into my hands, something changed. I don't know if I'm losing my mind or if it's the curse trying to claim me. The auction is close. I need to find out what happened to the others. The final entry stopped abruptly. There was no conclusion, no warning, just the sudden disappearance of Clara herself. She had never returned from that last investigation. Thomas clenched his jaw, the anger rising in his chest like an inferno. Clara had been so close. She had known the necklace's true nature, and it had cost her everything. He couldn't let her death be in vain. As he read, something caught his eye, a phrase underlined multiple times in Clara's journal. The buyers of the necklace are not just collectors. They are part of a much older group, a society known as the Obsidian Order. The name sounded familiar, but not in a way that Thomas could place. The Obsidian Order. What were they? And why had they been bidding on this cursed relic? The next morning, Thomas decided he needed to dig deeper. The necklace was an entry point to something much larger, something more sinister than he had initially realized. He needed answers. Answers that could only be found by taking a risk, by confronting the people who seemed to control the cursed relic. He knew where to start. An old contact, a retired detective named Henry Calloway. who had investigated high-profile cases involving strange disappearances and unsolved murders. Henry had been the one to help Clara when she had first begun investigating the connections between the necklace and the murders that had followed it. But Henry had since grown reclusive, his health deteriorating after a particularly close call with the same society that Thomas now sought to understand. It took some convincing, but after several hours, Thomas managed to meet Henry at a rundown cafe on the edge of town. Henry looked the same as Thomas remembered, grizzled, worn, his face drawn with years of stress. But his eyes were sharp, betraying a mind still capable of seeing things others couldn't. "Thomas," Henry greeted him gruffly, his voice low. "You're asking about things no one should be asking about. You don't want to get tangled up with them." "I don't have a choice," Thomas replied, setting the cursed necklace on the table between them. "Clara's dead, and I think I'm next." Henry's eyes widened as he took in the sight of the necklace, his gaze shifting from it to Thomas. He didn't need to ask how Thomas had come into possession of it. The look of desperation in his eyes was all the confirmation Henry needed. "You've touched it, haven't you?" Henry's voice was full of regret. "That's why you're here, because it's already started, hasn't it?" Thomas nodded grimly. The whispers were getting louder, more persistent. He could almost feel the necklace's power, an oppressive presence settling over him, urging him to do things, to seek out the truth. But the truth came at a price. Henry sighed deeply and leaned forward. The Obsidian Order. "They're not just collectors of rare artifacts, Thomas. They're an ancient society, one that's existed for centuries. They're connected to the occult, to forbidden knowledge. Some say they were the original creators of the cursed items, tools of manipulation, power, and control. The necklace was just one of many. Over the years, they've gathered relics like it, using them to grow stronger." "Why the curse? Why this necklace?" Thomas asked, his voice a whisper. His mind was racing, trying to piece the puzzle together. "What do they want with it?" "They want the power," Henry answered, his voice barely audible. "But not just for themselves. They want to control the world with it. They believe the necklace can give them dominion over life and death. The one who masters it will become invincible, immortal. The society's leaders have been using the necklace's curse to keep their grip on power for centuries. Each owner is a pawn, chosen to wear the necklace until they break." The words sank in slowly, but the truth felt as sharp as a knife. The Obsidian Order was after more than wealth. They were after domination, and the necklace was the key to their unholy plan. Suddenly, Henry's expression shifted. He looked over Thomas's shoulder, his eyes wide with fear. "They're here," he muttered. Before Thomas could ask what he meant, the cafe door slammed open, and in stepped two figures, dark-suited men with cold eyes and a purposeful stride. The air shifted, thick with menace. Henry's face paled. "This is your last warning, Thomas," Henry whispered urgently. "You don't want to go down this road. They'll stop at nothing to get what they want, if they catch you." But it was too late. The men were already moving toward them, their eyes locked on the cursed necklace. The two men approached quickly, their movements precise and deliberate, as though they had been trained for this exact moment. Thomas's heart raced, and the oppressive feeling in the room grew stronger, like the walls themselves were closing in. The necklace, resting innocently on the table, felt heavier than ever. Its dark allure tugged at his mind, as if it were calling to him, urging him to take it and run. But Thomas knew better than to let it consume him. The older man, the one with the sharp features and icy demeanor, spoke first. His voice was smooth, too smooth, as though it had been polished over years of manipulation. "Thomas Avery," the man said, his eyes glinting as he took in the necklace on the table. "We were wondering when you'd come looking for answers. It's a shame your sister didn't survive the investigation. But then again, she was never meant to." Thomas stood up abruptly, his mind racing. Henry's warning echoed in his head. They'll stop at nothing. This wasn't just an encounter with a criminal syndicate. It was something far more dangerous, far older. These men were part of the Obsidian Order, and their interest in the necklace was about more than just a relic. It was about control, and they wouldn't let anyone take it from them. "What do you want?" Thomas asked, trying to mask his fear with defiance. The man smiled, his lips curling into a cruel grin. "What we want is simple. We want the necklace, and we want you to leave, while you still have a choice. You have no idea what you're meddling with, Avery. No one survives the curse. No one." Behind him, the second man, a younger one with a scar running across his cheek, took a step forward, his hand resting on the grip of a pistol, tucked into his jacket. The message was clear. "Stay down, or we'll make you." Henry's eyes darted toward the door, then back to Thomas. His breathing quickened, and his hand hovered over the table, as if he were considering a move. But Thomas knew there was no time for hesitation. "We're not leaving without the necklace," Thomas said, his voice steady despite the rising panic. "It's mine now." The older man's expression hardened, and for a moment, Thomas thought he saw a flicker of recognition, perhaps even a hint of amusement. It was gone in an instant, replaced by an icy calm. "You don't understand, do you?" the man said, stepping closer, his gaze unwavering. "The necklace chooses its owner. It has chosen you. But it has a price, Avery. The same price it has always demanded from those who dare to possess it." At that, the room seemed to go cold, the air thickening, as though the curse itself had awakened. The necklace, which had once felt like a mere object, now seemed to pulse with life. The energy in the room shifted. Thomas could feel it crawling under his skin, pulling at him. The whispers from within the necklace grew louder, now not just in his mind, but in the very air around him. Henry's face drained of color as he whispered, almost to himself, "It's already started. You can't escape it." Before Thomas could react, the younger man lunged forward, grabbing the necklace from the table with a speed that was almost inhuman. The moment his fingers made contact with the cursed relic, a violent flash of light filled the room, blinding everyone for a split second. When Thomas's vision cleared, he saw the younger man standing motionless, his eyes wide with terror. A sickening crackling sound filled the air, and then, nothing. The man collapsed to the floor, his body contorting in unnatural ways. The older man didn't flinch. He merely watched with cold detachment. "Another sacrifice," he muttered under his breath, "just as it's always been." Thomas could hardly comprehend what had just happened. The man, no, the victim, lay lifeless on the floor, his body broken in ways that defied logic. And the necklace, it was now glowing faintly in the older man's hands. The man's eyes locked with Thomas's, and in that moment, Thomas understood. The curse wasn't just a force of death. It was an entity, a presence that lived within the necklace. The Obsidian Order had harnessed this power, controlling it for their own ends. But now, it was slipping from their grasp. "You see, Avery," the older man said, his voice low and reverberating with an ominous weight. "The necklace doesn't just kill, it corrupts. It feeds off those who come too close. It distorts their minds, twists their very souls. That's why Clara died. And now, you will too." Before Thomas could make a move, The man raised the necklace high, its dark light radiating like an ominous halo. The air grew thick, pressing down on Thomas, suffocating him. His hands shook, and the whispers in his mind screamed in agony. The necklace was trying to claim him. It was feeding on his fear, on his desperation for answers. But Thomas wasn't ready to let it win. In a desperate move, he grabbed the nearest object, a metal chair, and swung it at the older man with all his strength. The impact knocked the man back, sending the necklace flying from his hand. It landed on the ground with a sharp clink, its light dimming for a brief moment. Seizing the opportunity, Thomas dove for the necklace, his fingers wrapping around it just as the man surged forward, his eyes burning with fury. The moment Thomas touched it, a flood of visions overtook him. Images of every person who had ever worn the necklace, their lives consumed by darkness, their souls trapped in the same twisted cycle of power and death. He saw Clara, her eyes wide with terror, as she was consumed by the curse. He saw himself, alone and broken, staring into the abyss of the necklace's power. It was then that he realized the terrible truth. The curse wasn't just about death. It was about control. It sought to consume every part of its owner, mind, body, and soul, until nothing remained but a shell, a puppet, to the will of the Order. "No," Thomas shouted, his voice breaking through the visions. With every ounce of strength he had left, he gripped the necklace tighter, refusing to let it take him. He had to destroy it. He had no choice. The Order had already taken too much from him. In that instant, the older man lunged toward him, but Thomas reacted faster. He threw the necklace into the air, and with a primal scream, smashed it against the ground. The impact was deafening. For a moment, the world stood still. Then, the room erupted in a violent burst of energy. The explosion of light and sound was overwhelming. Thomas was thrown back, his body slamming into the wall. The older man's screams echoed through the chaos, but they were quickly drowned out by the blinding light that consumed the room. When the light finally faded, Thomas found himself lying on the cold floor, his ears ringing. His body ached, but he could still move. Slowly, painfully, he pushed himself to his feet. The necklace was gone. In its place lay only the shattered remnants of what had once been a powerful cursed artifact. And the room? It was eerily quiet. Henry was gone, taken by the curse long ago, perhaps. The two men from the Obsidian Order were nowhere to be seen, as if they had never existed. Thomas knew what he had to do. The curse had been broken, but the Order was far from finished. Their reach was vast, and their hunger for power would never cease. But for now, Thomas had survived, and that, he realized, was enough. Detective Sarah Morgan stood at the edge of a dimly lit alley in the heart of the city, her mind preoccupied with a nagging sense of dread. The tip she'd received earlier that evening had seemed almost too perfect, too good to be true. A hidden criminal empire operating beneath the city, in the long-abandoned subway tunnels. She had heard rumors over the years, whispers of illegal activities taking place in the forgotten depths, but nothing concrete. Now, she was standing at the forefront of what could be a major breakthrough in her career, or the catalyst for her undoing. The decision to act on the tip had been swift. Morgan was no stranger to the underworld, and she had seen enough darkness to trust her instincts. But something about this felt different. The local precinct had raided the tunnels with a heavy presence, her team included. They had expected to find stolen goods, perhaps some drugs, maybe weapons. But what they uncovered made the hairs on the back of Sarah's neck stand up. A hidden safe house, its contents strewn across the underground chamber. Piles of stolen electronics, luxury items, and contraband, that would have made any crime lord proud. But that wasn't the most disturbing discovery. In a small, darkened room at the back of the safe house, the team found what they could only describe as a graveyard. Dozens of skeletons, each one neatly arranged, as though placed there with care. No one spoke as they stood frozen in the room, the air thick with the smell of decay. These weren't the remains of anyone who had died in a conventional way. These were victims, people whose lives had been snuffed out, hidden away from the world's gaze. Sarah's eyes narrowed. This was no ordinary criminal enterprise. Whoever was behind this, they weren't just after profit. They were playing a much darker game. As the team began to process the scene, Sarah stepped outside to take a breath, her thoughts racing. She couldn't shake the feeling that she had just stumbled onto something far larger than anything she had ever encountered. The deeper she looked into the case, the more she feared what it would reveal. The days following the raid were a blur of paperwork, interrogations, and sleepless nights. But Sarah could not stop thinking about the skeletons, about the hollow eyes of the victims who had never had a chance to speak. She became obsessed with identifying them, piecing together their identities from fragments of clothing, personal items found on the bodies, and any evidence the forensics team could gather. It was during one of these late-night sessions that she stumbled upon something that stopped her cold. A photograph. The picture was grainy and faded, but it was enough. The photo showed a man standing proudly in front of a dilapidated train car, surrounded by a group of men in black suits, some of whom looked eerily familiar. One of them was a well-known city councilman, another, a prominent law enforcement officer. Her heart skipped a beat as she realized what this meant. The safe house, this underground lair of horrors, wasn't just the domain of common criminals. It was a secret sanctuary for those with power, for those who had connections that ran deep within the city's political and law enforcement systems. The raid was only the surface of something much darker. The city's elite had been involved, and Sarah had just uncovered the tip of an iceberg that could bring the whole corrupt system crashing down. As Sarah dug deeper, the puzzle pieces began to come together. The mastermind behind the operation was someone who knew the system inside and out. A ghost in the machine. A man who operated beneath the radar, manipulating both the criminal underworld and the political elite to keep his empire hidden. His name was Marcus Thorne. On the surface, Thorne appeared to be a respected businessman, an influential figure with ties to numerous charitable organizations, a man who had built a reputation for being a philanthropist. But beneath that polished exterior was something far more sinister. Marcus Thorne had been using the subway tunnels not only for storing stolen goods, but as a twisted sanctuary for his darkest desires. Sarah learned that he had been running a human trafficking operation that had spanned years. The skeletons in the safe house weren't just victims of robbery. They were people who had been lured into his grasp, their lives exploited for sport and profit. As she continued to uncover more about Thorne, Sarah realized that he was far more than just a criminal mastermind. He was a sociopath, a man who reveled in control and power. His empire stretched across the city's most influential corners, and his reach had grown so vast that even the police were too afraid to cross him. Sarah knew she had to confront him, but the closer she got to the truth, the more dangerous things became. By now, Sarah was receiving warnings. It started with subtle threats, a broken window at her apartment, an anonymous letter telling her to stop digging. But it quickly escalated. Late one evening, as she was walking back to her car, she was followed by a dark figure who vanished into the shadows just as she turned a corner. Then came the phone calls, whispered voices, telling her to let the investigation go, telling her she was in over her head. The fear began to sink in, and Sarah couldn't help but wonder if she was being watched at every moment. But she refused to back down. She had lost too much to let this go. The deeper she delved, the more she realized how deeply the roots of corruption ran. The police force, city officials, and even high-ranking members of the judicial system were in on it. The safe house was just one part of a much larger network that spread its tentacles into every aspect of the city's infrastructure. Sarah's allies in the force had turned on her too. Her trusted partner, Detective Marcus Hale, had been compromised. He was working for Thorne. At a crossroads, Sarah knew that the only way to take down Thorne was to infiltrate his network. She would need to expose the full extent of his operation and bring his empire crashing down from within. But that meant getting close. Too close. With her options running out, Sarah made a daring decision. She went underground. Armed with nothing but her wits, a recorder, and a hidden wire, she descended into the forgotten tunnels beneath the city. The further she ventured, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The walls seemed to close in around her, echoing the whispers of the lost souls who had once walked these corridors. And then she saw it. The heart of Thorne's empire. A hidden facility where he held his victims. People who were waiting to be sold, disposed of, or used for whatever cruel whims Thorne had in mind. But Thorne was waiting for her. In the dim light of the underground chamber, Sarah saw the man she had been hunting for so long. Thorne's eyes gleamed with the satisfaction of someone who knew they had won. He had anticipated her every move, and now she was trapped. But Sarah wasn't done yet. In a final act of defiance, she triggered the emergency alarms, sending chaos rippling through the facility. The showdown in the tunnels was intense, a battle of wits and willpower. Thorne's men closed in on Sarah, but she fought back fiercely, using everything at her disposal. In the end, it was Marcus Hale who turned the tide, though not in the way Sarah had hoped. He had been sent to kill her, but the realization that he was not just betraying her, but everyone he had sworn to protect, shattered something inside him. In a moment of hesitation, he allowed Sarah to escape with the crucial evidence needed to bring Thorne down. As the authorities raided the tunnels and apprehended Thorne, Sarah was left standing at the entrance, breathing heavily, her mind a swirl of conflicting emotions. The mastermind had been brought to justice, but the damage was already done. The city would never be the same. Though Marcus Thorne was behind bars, his influence remained a shadow over the city. The investigation had exposed a horrifying truth. Power, greed, and corruption were so deeply woven into the fabric of the city's elite that taking one criminal down did little to change the larger system. For Sarah, there was no victory, no closure, just the knowledge that some evil runs so deep, it's almost impossible to truly eradicate. The skeletons in the subway were only the beginning. The war against the dark underbelly of the city was far from over. And as Sarah gazed down at the cold, dark tunnels once again, she knew that she would never truly escape the depths. Greg Harper had always taken pride in his job. He wasn't a high-profile detective or an investigative journalist. He was just a man who did his job well. As a security guard at Ducari and Company, Greg had seen his fair share of characters. Rich businessmen, celebrities flashing their wealth, the occasional thief trying their luck. But none of them had ever caught his attention, quite like this night. Greg was a tall, broad-shouldered man with short-cropped brown hair and steady eyes that were always scanning, always alert. But as he sat in the security room that evening, watching the monitors flicker with the usual images of the store's aisles. He couldn't have known how different this night would be. The footage of the robbery was clear. Greg sat at his desk, seemingly oblivious to the heist taking place under his nose. His eyes were locked on the monitor, his hands resting on the console, his body leaning back slightly in his chair. The footage showed no sign of distress, no sign of anything unusual. But the police, who had arrived shortly after the robbery was discovered, couldn't ignore the fact that Greg was the only person present on camera during the heist. There were no other staff members, no visitors caught on the footage, and Greg's presence was constant throughout. They arrested him immediately. The arrest was quick, almost too quick. Greg was told there was no other option. He was the prime suspect. Despite the flawless alibi, footage showing him at the security desk, never leaving his post, the detectives were adamant. Someone on the inside had to be involved. The robbery was far too perfect. Detective Clara Davis, seasoned and sharp, was assigned to investigate the case. She stood at the police precinct, watching as Greg sat in a small, uncomfortable chair in the interrogation room. He seemed disoriented, confused by the accusation that had been thrown at him. His hands trembled slightly, a faint sheen of sweat visible on his brow. "Greg, I want you to understand something," Clara said, her voice steady but filled with authority. "We know the robbery took place on your watch. We know you were at your desk during the entire thing. But here's the problem. Your alibi is too perfect." Greg swallowed hard, glancing up at her. "I didn't do anything wrong. I don't know how they got in, or how they took anything." I swear Clara studied him closely, her eyes narrowing. She had interrogated countless criminals in her career, but something about Greg didn't sit right with her. His responses were too automatic, his face too blank, as though he was reciting words he had rehearsed. It didn't add up. "You disabled the security system," Clara said softly, but with a piercing edge. "You let them in." Greg flinched, shaking his head violently. I didn't disable anything. I didn't let anyone in. I don't know what happened. All I know is I was sitting at my post, watching the cameras." Clara leaned forward. "We'll get to the bottom of this, Greg, but you need to understand. You were the only one on the cameras, the only one. So, either you're lying, or something else is going on here." Greg lowered his head, his hands clasped together tightly. For a moment, Clara thought he might break, but instead, he looked up at her, his eyes filled with confusion. "I don't know how they did it, but it wasn't me. Please, you have to believe me." Clara didn't trust Greg, but she also didn't trust the case. Too many things didn't make sense. A perfect crime meant someone with knowledge, someone with inside information. But Greg had worked at Ducari and Company for years. He knew the routine, but there was no way he could have orchestrated the heist alone. Clara began her own investigation. She dug into Greg's background, his family, his past. Nothing about Greg's life stood out as criminal. He had no history of bad behavior, no record of involvement in anything illegal. But she had a gut feeling that there was something missing, something that no one had mentioned. Days passed, and Clara's search led her to an old photo in a dusty file. It was of Greg and a man who looked exactly like him, an identical twin. The name on the photo was Adam Harper. Clara's heart skipped a beat. Greg had a twin brother, but no one had mentioned him before. Greg's twin, Adam, had vanished years ago. According to family records, Adam had a history of petty crimes in his youth, but nothing serious enough to have warranted suspicion. He had been living in another city for years, far away from Greg. The records didn't mention much about Adam's time in the city, but Clara knew one thing. Adam had to be the key. She reached out to a few old acquaintances and learned that Adam had returned to the city just months before the robbery. He had been in town, though no one seemed to know his whereabouts at the time of the heist. Clara's investigation began to paint a clearer picture. Adam, who had always been more of a wild card, had spent years keeping his distance from Greg, and Greg had kept it that way. His twin brother had never been a subject of discussion. But Clara had her suspicions. Adam could have exploited his twin's position, using Greg's role as the security guard to gain access to the store's inner workings. He knew Greg's schedule, his habits, and most importantly, he knew the vulnerabilities of the store's security system. It wasn't beyond the realm of possibility that Adam had learned how to manipulate the system from afar. After days of painstaking research and interviews with security personnel, Clara discovered something chilling. The robbery had been executed with knowledge that no outsider could have possessed. Greg had been played, used as a pawn, in a game he hadn't even realized he was part of. Adam, the true mastermind behind the heist, had learned to manipulate the store's security system remotely. He had planted a device, a small chip that could intercept the security feed and disable the cameras and alarms at just the right time. Greg's twin had orchestrated the robbery from outside the building, using his brother's identity to cover his tracks. Clara realized that Adam had played a long game. He had known that Greg's job at Ducari and Company would be the perfect opportunity for a heist. Greg was the ideal accomplice, a man who would never suspect his own brother of such a crime, someone who trusted Adam implicitly. Greg had been completely unaware that his brother had been the one behind the entire plan. He had thought nothing of the small, seemingly innocuous interactions he'd had with Adam in the weeks leading up to the heist. But Adam had been laying the groundwork for months, learning how to manipulate the store's systems, knowing exactly when and how to strike. Clara finally confronted Greg with the truth. "Your brother used you," Clara said softly, her voice tinged with a mix of sympathy and firm resolve. "He manipulated you into helping him, but you didn't know, did you? You didn't know he was using you to pull off the perfect crime." Greg's face was pale, his body trembling. No, he wouldn't. He's my brother." "I'm sorry, Greg," Clara said, "but Adam was the one who did it. He was the one who orchestrated the heist." Greg's face twisted with disbelief, and then, slowly, the realization began to sink in. Clara watched Greg carefully, her mind racing as he processed the revelation. She had broken the news to him gently, but the shock of discovering that his own brother had used him for such a heinous crime left Greg speechless. His face crumpled with disbelief, his hands shaking as he held onto the chair. "Greg, you have to understand," Clara said, her tone softening but still firm. "Your brother played you. You had no idea what was going on, but we need to catch him." Greg didn't respond at first. His eyes were distant, lost in thought, as if his world had just collapsed around him. He finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what to do. Adam's always been manipulative, but I never thought he'd go this far." Clara leaned forward, placing her hands on the table. "Tell me about your brother. Everything you can remember. Every detail. We need to understand how he could have pulled this off." Greg hesitated, then began to speak, his voice trembling, but growing more certain as the words left his lips. "He's always been different," Greg said, his eyes flicking upward as if searching for the right words. "When we were kids, he was the troublemaker, always doing things behind my back. I tried to keep him on the right path, but he didn't want to listen. We grew apart when he left. After he went to college, I didn't hear much from him." Clara pressed further. "But he came back recently, right?" Greg nodded slowly. "Yeah, a few months ago. He said he was living here now, wanted to reconnect. But there was something off about him. He wasn't the same Adam I remembered. He was colder. He kept asking me about my work, about the store, the security systems, things he shouldn't have known. But I just brushed it off. I thought he was just trying to catch up. Clara's mind was working furiously. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fall into place. Adam had been back in town for months, subtly gathering information, learning everything he needed to know about Greg's job, the store's security systems, and how to manipulate the system from afar. Adam had done his homework, and he had used Greg's trust to pull off a heist that would change their lives forever. I should have seen it, Greg muttered, burying his face in his hands. I should have realized what he was doing. Clara gave him a moment to collect himself before continuing. We'll need to find out where he went after the robbery. We have his name. Now we need to find out where he's been hiding. Do you have any idea? Greg looked up at her, his eyes filled with guilt and helplessness. I don't know. He always kept to himself. Never gave me much information about his life. But he used to talk about a place, some old motel just on the outskirts of the city. It's not far from here. Clara made a note of it. That's a start. We'll look into it. Clara wasted no time. She gathered a small team of officers and set off for the motel Greg had mentioned. It was a run-down establishment, with peeling paint on the walls and a flickering neon sign that looked as though it might collapse at any moment. The kind of place people went when they didn't want to be found. As Clara entered the motel's lobby, the smell of stale cigarette smoke and cheap perfume hit her instantly. The clerk behind the counter was an older man, wearing a stained t-shirt and a faded baseball cap. Clara approached the counter, flashing her badge. "Excuse me," she said. "I'm looking for a guest who might be staying here. His name is Adam Harper." The clerk looked up at her, his eyes narrowed in suspicion. "You'll have to be more specific. We get a lot of people in and out of here." Clara pressed. "He's a man in his late 30s, around 6 feet tall, dark hair, probably been here for a while." The clerk scratched his chin and then sighed. "Yeah, I remember him. He's been here the last few weeks, in and out. Paid cash, didn't ask many questions. Room 12. Clara's heart raced. This was it. She had to find him before he slipped away again. She signaled to the officers to follow her, and they made their way down a narrow hallway, past dingy doors and flickering lights, until they reached room 12. Clara stood outside the door, taking a deep breath. This could be it. The moment when Adam Harper, the mastermind behind the heist, would finally be captured. She nodded to the officers who took their positions to surround the room. Clara knocked sharply on the door. "Adam Harper," she called, her voice firm. "We know what you've done. Open up." For a moment, there was no response. Then, the faint sound of shuffling footsteps from inside the room reached Clara's ears. The door creaked open just enough to reveal a pair of cold, calculating eyes staring at her from the other side. "Detective Davis," Adam said, his voice smooth, but laced with a hint of amusement. "I was wondering when you'd show up." Clara's hand instinctively reached for her gun. "Step away from the door, Adam. You're under arrest for the robbery at Ducari and Company, and for conspiracy to commit theft." Adam chuckled darkly, not fazed in the slightest. "Oh, Clara, you've got it all wrong. I'm not the criminal here. I just saw an opportunity, and you know what they say. When opportunity knocks, you take it." He stepped back, allowing Clara and her team to enter. The room was sparsely furnished, with only a few belongings scattered around. But what caught Clara's attention was a large black duffel bag sitting on the bed, half open. Inside, she saw glittering diamonds, gold chains, and the unmistakable gleam of stolen watches. "Everything you've stolen is here, Adam," Clara said, her voice steady, though she could feel the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "It's over." Adam's grin widened. "You don't get it, do you? This wasn't about the money. It was about the thrill, the game. Greg, well, he was just an easy mark." Clara's heart sank as Adam's words hit her like a punch. "You used your own brother. You manipulated him into helping you commit the perfect crime." Adam's smile faltered, but only for a second. "He was weak, Clara. Always too trusting, too simple. I gave him a reason to believe in something bigger. And now look at him. Ruined. He'll never be the same." Adam was arrested without resistance, but his smug demeanor never wavered. He had known this moment would come, but he seemed oddly at peace with it. It was as if the game itself had been enough for him. He had played Greg, played the system, and now the law was closing in. Clara watched as Adam was taken into custody, but a part of her couldn't shake the lingering sense of unease. Yes, they had caught the criminal. Yes, they had retrieved the stolen goods. But the damage done to Greg was irreversible. His life would never be the same. As Adam was driven away, Clara turned to Greg, who had followed them to the police station. His face was pale, his eyes haunted. "I didn't know, Clara. I didn't know it was him," Greg whispered, his voice barely audible. "How could I have known?" Clara placed a hand on his shoulder. "You didn't, Greg. You couldn't have. But now it's over. We'll make sure your name is cleared." But as Greg nodded, a cold realization settled in his mind. Even if his name was cleared, the consequences of his unwitting involvement in the heist would follow him for the rest of his life. And in the quiet of the police station, Clara realized that justice wasn't always as clear-cut as it seemed. Weeks passed. Adam Harper was sentenced to life in prison for his role in the robbery and for manipulating his brother into helping him. Greg's name was cleared, but the emotional toll remained. He had lost more than just his job. He had lost his trust in the people he loved most. Clara couldn't shake the questions that lingered in her mind. Was justice truly served? Could Greg ever find redemption after being played so expertly by the person he trusted most? The case was closed, but the scars left by the twin heist would never fully heal for anyone involved. The humid air of the port was thick with the scent of salt water and industrial fumes. The bright afternoon sun beat down relentlessly, casting sharp shadows on the maze of containers and ships that lined the harbor. Officer Nathan Bennett stood at the edge of the tarmac, squinting as a massive freighter docked with the shore. His phone buzzed in his pocket, interrupting the monotony of his usual routine. "Bennett," he answered gruffly, a seasoned customs officer with years of experience chasing down illicit goods. "Got a tip," came the voice of his colleague, Sarah Green, from the other end of the line. "A shipment just arrived, and we're looking at some serious contraband. Meet us at the inspection yard." Nathan didn't hesitate. The city had been dealing with a sharp rise in smuggling activity, mostly focused on high-end goods, rare antiques, priceless artifacts, and black market art. But this tip sounded different, more dangerous. As he arrived at the inspection yard, Nathan found Sarah pacing near a cluster of officers. She had an urgency in her demeanor that he didn't usually see from her. "What's the deal?" Nathan asked. Sarah nodded toward the crate being unloaded from the freighter. "This is the shipment. Nothing suspicious on the manifest, but the tip came through loud and clear. We need to check everything." As the container doors opened, the contents were revealed. Dozens of crates filled with items that looked innocuous enough at first glance. Furniture, trinkets, and what appeared to be old-fashioned wooden boxes. the kind you might find in a dusty antique shop. But something about the way they were packed stood out. Too neatly, too precisely arranged. Nathan's eyes locked onto one particular crate, positioned almost deliberately in the middle. "This one," he said, pointing toward it. The officers moved quickly, opening the crate to reveal a collection of ornate wooden boxes. The craftsmanship was exquisite, aged in a way that suggested they were antiques. But there was one that immediately drew Nathan's attention. A puzzle box, intricately carved, its surface covered in strange symbols and patterns. "Never seen anything like this before," Sarah muttered, her brow furrowed as she leaned in closer. Nathan ran his fingers over the smooth wood, the weight of the box surprisingly heavy for its size. The design was unlike anything he had encountered, each symbol unfamiliar and ancient-looking. The box was sealed shut, no obvious way to open it. Yet there was something unsettling about it, almost as if it were daring them to figure it out. "Who are these guys?" Nathan asked, his voice low. Sarah didn't respond immediately. Instead, she picked up a small slip of paper from inside the crate, scanning it quickly. "They're just listed as private importers. This looks like a diversion. Something bigger is going on." Before Nathan could ask her to elaborate, a group of men in matching suits approached, their cold eyes locking onto the box. Their leader, a tall man with slick black hair and a leather jacket, stepped forward, his gaze fixed on the wooden puzzle box. "You have no idea what you found," the man said, in a clipped tone, his voice almost a whisper. "We'll take it from here." Nathan's instincts flared. He stepped in front of the crate, blocking the man's path. "Who are you, and what's your interest in this shipment?" The man didn't flinch. He simply smiled coldly. "You'll never know," he said, his eyes glinting. "But you've just made a dangerous mistake." Before Nathan could respond, the group turned and quickly exited the yard, leaving him standing with the puzzle box in hand. The mystery surrounding the wooden puzzle box was more than Nathan had bargained for. Back at his office, he sat at his desk, staring at the box in front of him, unsure of what to make of it. His fingers traced the engraved symbols, trying to make sense of them, but they were too complex, too unfamiliar. This wasn't just any ordinary antique. He knew it. Sarah walked into the room, holding a cup of coffee in one hand and a folder in the other. "We ran a background check on the men who tried to take it. They're connected to an international network of smugglers, art thieves, drug dealers, you name it." Nathan raised an eyebrow. "What's their endgame with this box?" "I don't know yet," Sarah replied, sitting across from him. "But I've never seen anything like this in all my years on the force. The symbols, they don't match anything in the standard databases. We ran it through every system we have, and nothing came up." Nathan's eyes narrowed. "So this isn't just a regular artifact smuggling ring?" "No," Sarah said, her voice tinged with disbelief. "Whatever's inside this box, it's not just a piece of junk. I think they're after something much bigger." Nathan leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. What if it's not just about the box itself? What if the box is the key to something else? Something bigger? Sarah asked, the realization dawning on her. "Exactly," Nathan replied, his mind racing. "What if this is part of a larger treasure hunt? An ancient artifact buried for centuries, and now the pieces are finally coming together." As they both stared at the puzzle box, Nathan's gut told him this was only the beginning. Whoever was behind this smuggling ring wasn't just interested in money. They were chasing something far more valuable, something that could change the course of history. The box wasn't just an object, it was a map. The carvings, the symbols, they weren't just decoration, they were clues. Nathan didn't waste any time. He contacted several experts in ancient languages and cryptography, hoping that someone might be able to decipher the symbols. But every expert he brought in hit a dead end. The puzzle seemed to resist all efforts at interpretation, as though it were designed to keep its secrets hidden. Days passed, and the investigation began to take a toll on Nathan. His phone rang constantly with updates, but each lead only seemed to draw him further into a web of deceit, pulling him deeper into the criminal underworld. The smugglers, who had been connected to everything from rare art auctions to stolen goods, had somehow managed to elude capture, always staying one step ahead. Then, just when Nathan thought he was out of options, he received an unexpected call. It was from an old acquaintance, Vincent Hart, a disgraced art thief who had turned informant after being caught in a sting operation years ago. Vincent had a reputation for knowing everything that went on in the criminal world, and Nathan had always kept in contact with him. He could be a useful ally, especially now. "I know you've got the puzzle box," Vincent said, his voice crackling through the phone. "You don't want to mess with this, Bennett. It's more dangerous than you realize." Nathan stood up from his desk, glancing at Sarah. "What do you mean?" "There's a vault," Vincent explained, his voice low and serious. "A hidden vault. It's said to contain priceless artifacts, stolen treasures, things that have been lost to history. And that box? It's the key to finding it." "Who's behind this?" Nathan asked. Vincent's voice dropped to a whisper. "I can't tell you everything, but trust me, the people who want that vault aren't just criminals. They're powerful, global, secretive, and they won't stop until they get their hands on the key." Nathan's heart pounded. This was bigger than he'd thought. It wasn't just a simple smuggling operation. It was part of something far more sinister. "Where do I find the vault?" Nathan asked. Vincent hesitated. "I'll give you one clue. Look at the markings on the box. Study them carefully. They'll point you to the first location. But be careful, Bennett. The closer you get to the vault, the more dangerous it becomes. People have died trying to find it." Nathan's mind raced as he hung up the phone. He looked at the puzzle box once again. The hunt had begun. As the investigation deepened, Nathan realized that time was running out. The smugglers were closing in. The international network that had been lurking in the shadows for years was beginning to surface. Nathan's team was already under constant surveillance, and their every move seemed to be anticipated. The clues within the puzzle box would lead Nathan to dangerous places, secrets buried in history that could shatter everything he thought he knew about the past. But it was becoming clear that the closer Nathan got to the truth, the more deadly the stakes became. Would he uncover the vault's secret in time? And if he did, would the world be ready for the truth? The next morning, Nathan sat at his desk, the puzzle box lying in front of him, its wooden surface reflecting the dim light of his office. His thoughts were consumed with Vincent Hart's warning: the vault, the artifacts, the global conspiracy. The more he thought about it, the more the puzzle box felt like a ticking time bomb. He flipped open the folder containing the latest updates from his team. There was a photo of the markings on the box, those strange symbols etched into the surface, some of which resembled ancient runes. His team had scoured every available resource, but none of the experts could make sense of them. Nathan ran his fingers over the symbols again, his mind working frantically. The first clue. Vincent's voice echoed in his mind. The puzzle box seemed almost alive in his hands. As he examined it closely, Nathan noticed a slight shift in the way the carvings caught the light. The designs weren't just carved, they were subtly raised, creating a texture that seemed to change when touched. He thought he felt a seam, a delicate groove that might unlock part of the box. His heart raced as he carefully manipulated the lid. A small section gave way, and to his surprise, a faint click sounded, revealing a hidden compartment inside. He peered in, only to find a piece of parchment, a map, rolled up tightly and sealed with a wax emblem. Sarah, who had been working at her desk across the room, noticed his movement and rushed over. "What is it?" she asked, her voice tense. Nathan unrolled the parchment slowly. The map was ancient, worn, and covered with more of those symbols. But there was a location, marked clearly in red ink, a place deep in the Middle East. He had seen the name before, but he couldn't place it right away. "I need to get this to the experts," Nathan said, his voice a mixture of excitement and caution. "This is a lead." Sarah studied the map closely. What if it's a trap? What if they want you to follow it? Nathan clenched his jaw. That's a risk I'll have to take. With the map secured, Nathan arranged a meeting with an old friend, an archaeologist named Dr. Gemma Reynolds. Gemma had worked with Nathan on previous cases involving stolen artifacts, and she had an extensive knowledge of ancient cultures and languages. If anyone could help decipher the symbols on the map, it was her. Gemma's office was cluttered with artifacts and historical texts, the walls lined with bookshelves filled to the brim. She was sitting at her desk when Nathan walked in, holding the map carefully in his hands. "Dr. Reynolds," Nathan greeted, a sense of urgency in his tone. "I need your help." She raised an eyebrow, glancing up from her work. "Let me guess. Another treasure hunt?" "This is different," Nathan replied, handing her the map. "I found something connected to a global smuggling ring. I think it's tied to stolen artifacts, and this might be the key to finding them." Gemma carefully unrolled the map, studying the markings with intense focus. "This place," she said after a few moments, pointing to the red-marked location. "It's a site in Iraq, an ancient temple that was believed to have been destroyed in the early 20th century during a series of conflicts. However, some scholars suspect that parts of the site still exist, hidden beneath the rubble. If these markings are accurate, then this could be the location of an incredible discovery." Nathan's heart pounded. What kind of discovery? Gemma leaned back in her chair, rubbing her chin. "If the site is what I think it is, it could be the final resting place of a royal treasure, a collection of ancient relics lost to history. We're talking about artifacts from the Babylonians, Sumerians, and possibly even earlier. This treasure could be worth billions." Nathan felt the weight of Gemma's words. The stakes were higher than ever. But there was a darker implication, one that Nathan couldn't ignore. The smugglers weren't just after money. They were after something that could reshape history. "I need to go there," Nathan said, his voice firm. Gemma looked at him skeptically. "You know the dangers, right? The site is in a conflict zone. You'll need to be careful. Not to mention, if the smugglers are after this, you're walking into a trap." "I don't have a choice," Nathan replied, the decision already made. "But I need your help. Can you give me the coordinates? I'll need to get there quickly." Gemma hesitated, then nodded. "I'll send you the coordinates. But you need to understand, this treasure isn't just valuable. It's dangerous. Whoever's after it isn't just looking for money. They're looking for power. And that's something I'm not sure anyone should have." Nathan stood up, tucking the map into his jacket. "I'll be careful." The journey to Iraq was fraught with tension. Nathan flew into the country under the radar, using every resource at his disposal to ensure he was undetected. The smugglers were powerful and had a vast network, and Nathan knew he couldn't afford to take any chances. As he arrived at a nearby military base, He was met by a local guide, Farid, who had connections in the region. Farid had agreed to help Nathan navigate the desert, guiding him to the ruins of the ancient temple. "It's dangerous out here," Farid warned as they loaded up the truck. "There are bandits, and worse, mercenaries who'll kill you for a dime." Nathan glanced at his companion, noting the tension in Farid's posture. "Do you think the smugglers know about this site?" Farid nodded grimly. "If they're after what I think they're after, they'll stop at nothing to get it. You need to be prepared for anything." As they traveled deeper into the desert, the landscape grew more desolate. The towering dunes stretched endlessly, the heat oppressive. At night, the cold wind whipped through the barren landscape, and Nathan couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching them. The following morning, after a grueling drive through the unforgiving desert, they finally arrived at the site, a collection of crumbling stone structures barely visible beneath the sand. The remnants of the ancient temple lay scattered, half buried, in the shifting dunes. "This is it," Farid said, pointing to a large stone archway, barely visible under a layer of sand. "If the rumors are true, the vault is hidden somewhere beneath this temple." Nathan nodded, his pulse quickening. But before they could proceed, the sound of approaching vehicles cut through the stillness of the desert. Dust rose in the distance, too many vehicles for comfort. "Stay low," Farid hissed, pulling Nathan behind a pile of rocks. "They're here, the smugglers." Nathan and Farid huddled behind the rocks, watching as a convoy of black SUVs approached the temple ruins. Armed men spilled out of the vehicles, their eyes scanning the area with ruthless precision. Nathan recognized their leader immediately, the same man who had confronted him at the port, the cold-eyed smuggler who had threatened him. This was it. The smugglers had found them. Nathan's heart raced as he glanced at Farid. "We need to get to the vault first." Farid nodded grimly. "Follow me." They made their way toward the entrance to the temple, ducking behind pillars and dodging the mercenaries, who were now swarming the area. Nathan could feel the tension in the air. Every second counted. If the smugglers got to the vault before him, it could mean disaster. But as they approached the entrance, a gunshot rang out. The gunshot rang out, echoing through the ruins. Nathan froze. His heart skipped a beat as the sound of footsteps and muffled shouts reached his ears. They had been spotted. The smugglers weren't far behind. "Move," Farid hissed, grabbing Nathan's arm and pulling him toward a narrow crack in the temple's walls. The entrance to the hidden vault was just beyond it, barely visible in the dim light filtering through the crumbling structure. But it wasn't just the smugglers who were hunting them. Time was also working against them. The ancient puzzle box and its hidden clues had led them here, but Nathan knew that the vault wasn't going to open itself. "Do you have the key?" Farid whispered urgently as they crouched behind a pillar. Nathan pulled the puzzle box from his bag, its surface still warm from his hands, and placed it carefully in Farid's palm. The markings on the box seemed to shimmer in the low light of the temple, the symbols aligning in a way that Nathan hadn't noticed before. "There's got to be a way to unlock it," Nathan said, his voice tinged with desperation. "The clues. Everything points here." Farid studied the box intently, his fingers tracing the carvings with a skillful touch. Then, after what felt like an eternity, he stopped, eyes widening. "This is it. The markings align with the stonework here. It's a puzzle, just like the box." Nathan's pulse quickened. "What do you mean? How do we open it?" Without answering, Farid slid the box into a recess in the stone wall, where the carvings matched perfectly. He turned it, and with a soft grinding noise, the stone beneath their feet shifted. The ground trembled as a hidden passageway opened before them, revealing a dark, narrow tunnel that led downward. "Go," Farid urged, his eyes darting nervously toward the distant sounds of approaching footsteps. Nathan didn't need to be told twice. He plunged forward, adrenaline pumping through his veins. Farid followed closely behind. As they descended the tunnel, the air grew thicker, the scent of earth and dust clogging their senses. They emerged into a vast underground chamber, a cavernous space lined with ancient stone pillars and filled with an eerie silence. The walls of the chamber were covered in more symbols, identical to those on the puzzle box. It was as though the whole room was one giant puzzle, waiting to be solved. "Where is it?" Nathan murmured, scanning the room. "Where's the vault?" Farid pointed to the far wall, where a massive stone door stood, partially obscured by moss and time. There, embedded in the stone, was a large, intricately designed keyhole, one that looked eerily familiar. It matched the shape of the golden key inside the puzzle box. The realization hit Nathan like a freight train. The key. It was always meant to unlock this vault. He rushed toward the door, the golden key clutched tightly in his hand. But as he inserted it into the keyhole, a low rumble shook the chamber. The walls groaned in protest as the door slowly began to open, revealing a room bathed in a strange, flickering light. Nathan's breath caught in his throat as he stepped inside. The room before them was unlike anything Nathan had ever seen. It was filled with priceless artifacts, ancient sculptures, vases, and jewelry of unimaginable value. But at the center of it all was a massive stone altar, covered in dust, its surface littered with relics that seemed almost out of place in the modern world. Nathan's eyes locked onto one particular object, resting on the altar. A golden chest, ornately decorated with intricate carvings that mirrored those on the puzzle box. It was as if everything had led to this moment, to this single chest. "This is it," Farid whispered, his voice barely audible as he approached the chest. The treasure, the things that were lost to time. Nathan reached for the chest, but as his fingers brushed its surface, the sound of footsteps echoed from behind. They were not alone. Nathan spun around, his pulse racing. The smugglers had caught up with them. The tall man with slick black hair, the one who had confronted Nathan at the port, emerged from the shadows, flanked by several heavily armed mercenaries. "So this is where the trail ends," the man said, his voice cold and mocking. "You've been a thorn in our side for far too long, Nathan, but you were never going to stop us." Nathan took a step back, instinctively placing himself between the smugglers and the golden chest. "You don't understand. This isn't just about the treasure. This is bigger than you." The smuggler's cold smile widened. "Oh, we understand perfectly. We've known about this vault for years. You've just been too stupid to realize it's not about the money. It's about power." Nathan's stomach tightened. The words hit him like a punch. The smugglers group wasn't just interested in stolen artifacts. They were after something much more dangerous. This was about controlling knowledge, history itself. And Nathan was caught in the middle. "You've lost," the smuggler continued, stepping forward. "Now hand over the key and the box. We'll let you walk out of here alive." Farid took a step toward Nathan. "Don't do it," he hissed. "This is exactly what they want. They'll destroy everything." Nathan's fingers clenched around the key. His mind raced. He had to act fast. The smugglers weren't going to give up without a fight, and if they got the chest, they could reshape history to their advantage. Suddenly, a voice cut through the tension. "No one is going anywhere." Nathan's heart leaped as a new figure appeared in the doorway. the woman he had least expected to see. Gemma Reynolds, the archaeologist who had helped him decipher the clues. "What are you doing here?" Nathan demanded, his voice laced with disbelief. Gemma's eyes were cold, calculating. "I couldn't let you do this alone, Nathan. You have no idea what's at stake here. The treasure, this vault, contains more than just relics. It holds the knowledge of lost civilizations, maps, and secrets that could change everything. The smugglers aren't the only ones who want it. There are others, people much more dangerous, with far more resources, people who would do anything to keep it hidden." Nathan felt a chill run down his spine. "So you've been in on this the whole time?" Gemma stepped forward, her expression hardening. "I never wanted you to be caught in the crossfire, Nathan. But now that you're here, there's no turning back. We need to secure the vault and protect the knowledge inside." The smuggler's eyes flickered with realization. "You're with her, aren't you?" he spat. "You've been playing both sides." Before Nathan could respond, Gemma raised a hand, signaling for the mercenaries to stand down. "This isn't about sides anymore. This is about survival. Now, Nathan, you need to decide. You have the key, but what will you do with it?" Nathan stood in the middle of the chamber, torn between his moral compass and the looming threat of global corruption. The chest before him held untold power, knowledge that could either heal or destroy the world. The smugglers, Gemma, and the people behind the scenes all had their own interests, but Nathan had something they didn't: the truth. Gemma stepped closer, her eyes filled with urgency. "We need to make sure it doesn't fall into the wrong hands. You have to trust me." For a long moment, Nathan hesitated. He had come so far, but now the weight of the decision pressed on him like 1,000 tons. Could he open the chest and expose its secrets? Or would that unleash something too dangerous for the world to handle? Finally, Nathan made his choice. With a steady hand, he turned the key and opened the golden chest. Inside, there were no jewels, no treasures. Instead, there were scrolls, ancient writings, maps, and blueprints. The real treasure wasn't material wealth. It was the knowledge contained in these artifacts. Knowledge that could either build or break civilizations. And as the smugglers and mercenaries closed in, Nathan realized that the true heist was not about what was stolen, but who controlled the secrets of the past. As Nathan slowly lifted the lid of the golden chest, the dim light from the chamber flickered across the scrolls and ancient parchments within. There were no jewels, no gilded objects, just pages, worn and weathered with age. Some were adorned with intricate hand-drawn maps. Others were filled with symbols that Nathan couldn't yet begin to decipher. The smugglers behind him, clearly expecting a different kind of treasure, froze in stunned silence. For a moment, Nathan felt a brief flicker of triumph, until the tall smuggler, with cold, calculating eyes, spoke. "What is this?" the man demanded, his voice seething with frustration. "Where are the relics? Where's the treasure we were promised?" Gemma, standing beside Nathan, stepped forward. Her face, once full of deceit, now hardened with determination. "This is the treasure," she said, her voice steady. "It's not about gold and jewels. It's about knowledge. These scrolls contain lost knowledge, maps to other treasures, blueprints for technologies from forgotten civilizations, and details of long-lost empires. They're worth more than any material wealth you could imagine." The smugglers exchanged uneasy glances, their weapons still drawn, but their resolve beginning to waver. Nathan stepped closer to the chest, his hand hovering over the parchment closest to him. "This could change everything," he muttered under his breath. But his thoughts were interrupted by the sound of more footsteps, louder, heavier. approaching from the far end of the chamber. "More of them," Farid whispered urgently. "We don't have much time." The entrance to the vault chamber was filled with shadow as more figures appeared, clad in dark clothing, their faces hidden behind masks. Nathan's stomach clenched. These weren't just smugglers. These were professionals, mercenaries, or worse, operatives from a larger, more dangerous organization. Gemma stepped forward, blocking the doorway with her body. "We can't let them take this. You don't understand, Nathan. There are people who would use this knowledge for more than just profit. They'd use it to control the future." Nathan's eyes widened as the realization hit him. The stakes weren't just about recovering ancient treasures. If the wrong hands took control of the knowledge within these scrolls, it could change the course of history, perhaps even reshape the balance of power across the globe. The tall smuggler cursed, his patience thinning. "Enough talk." He pointed toward the chest. "We're taking it no matter what. You're all dead men walking." Nathan's pulse quickened as he glanced at the mercenaries closing in. It was clear there was no room for negotiation. If he didn't act fast, this knowledge would fall into the wrong hands, and there would be no telling the damage it could cause. Suddenly, the ground beneath them trembled. The chamber shook violently, as if the very structure itself was reacting to the imminent danger. Nathan's heart raced. Was it the temple, responding to their presence? Or had someone triggered a hidden defense? Before Nathan could react, the stone doors at the far end of the chamber slammed shut with a deafening roar. The entrance was sealed. "Trapped," Farid said, his voice grim. The chamber was now eerily quiet, save for the muffled sounds of distant echoes. The smugglers, Gemma, Farid, and Nathan, were all trapped in the dimly lit room, the walls narrowing as the tension rose. Gemma, sensing the escalating danger, drew a small gun from her waist. "We don't want to do this," she said, her voice cold, but there was no mistaking the resolve in her eyes. "But if we have to, we will." Nathan felt a surge of uncertainty as the smugglers and mercenaries leveled their weapons. This was no longer a fight for treasure. It was a fight for survival. The tall smuggler's smile faded into something darker. "You should have stayed out of this, Nathan. You don't know who you're dealing with." Nathan's mind raced. He needed to buy time, to think of a way out. The scrolls, they were the key to everything. But how could he protect them while escaping? Suddenly, a voice echoed from the back of the chamber, a deep, gravelly voice that sent a chill down Nathan's spine. "That's enough." The mercenaries turned toward the voice, and Nathan's breath caught as the figure stepped into view. The man was tall, his face obscured by a black mask, but Nathan immediately recognized the silhouette. Kane, a notorious arms dealer, and the leader of an even more dangerous network of criminal organizations. He was rumored to be pulling the strings behind several international smuggling rings, but his true motivations had always remained a mystery. Now, it was clear he was the one behind the scheme to seize the vault's treasures. Kane's cold eyes swept the room, his gaze stopping on Nathan. "You've been a thorn in my side for too long, Nathan. It's time to end this." "Why?" Nathan asked, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at him. "Why all this?" "It's just knowledge." Kane's lips curled into a thin smile. "Knowledge is power, and the power in those scrolls could reshape the world. You think I want gold and jewels? Number, I want control. With these secrets, I can leverage entire governments. I can start wars and end them. The world will bend to my will." Nathan's blood ran cold. "You're insane." Kane's smile vanished. "Maybe, but I'll be the one in charge. And now, I'm going to make sure you don't stop me." In the chaos, Nathan felt his mind snapping into focus. He needed to act quickly. Cain wasn't just a criminal. He was a mastermind. And if Nathan let him take control of the vault's knowledge, it would mean global devastation. Gemma moved swiftly, her gun trained on Cain. "You're not getting away with this, Cain. You'll never be able to use these artifacts for your own gain." Cain raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. "You've miscalculated, Gemma. You think you're a player in this game? You've been working for me this whole time. You were the one who set up Nathan after all." Nathan's eyes widened. Gemma had betrayed him? "No," Gemma said, her voice strained. But Cain wasn't listening. "You see, Nathan, I knew you'd come for this. But I also knew you wouldn't be able to resist. You always had the need to be the hero, the one who saves the day. You wanted to be the one to stop the chaos." He chuckled darkly. "But in the end, it's always about control. And now, I have it." The room fell silent, the weight of Cain's words sinking in. Nathan knew he had to act fast, but with Gemma caught in the web of betrayal and the smugglers closing in, there was little time left. Nathan had no choice. He grabbed one of the scrolls, a map that could lead to even more hidden vaults, and hurled it toward the far corner of the chamber. Cain's men turned to chase it, and in that split second of distraction, Nathan moved. He ran toward the stone altar, his fingers scrambling for the other artifacts. Behind him, gunshots rang out as the smugglers reacted. He knew it was now or never. "Fareed!" Nathan shouted. "Help me!" Fareed's voice came from the shadows. "I've got your back." Nathan grabbed the last remaining scroll and bolted toward the back of the room, a surge of adrenaline coursing through him. The vault wasn't just about treasure. It was about survival. The walls of the temple seemed to close in on him as the final battle raged behind him. But Nathan knew that the most important thing was to escape with the knowledge, before Cain or anyone else could claim it. Nathan and Fareed managed to reach the exit, but not before the entire temple began to crumble. The smugglers had triggered some kind of security mechanism, causing the entire structure to collapse. The last thing Nathan saw before the dust engulfed them was Gemma, standing frozen among the chaos, her face torn between loyalty and betrayal. They had escaped, but the vault had been destroyed. The knowledge within, the power that had been hidden for millennia, was lost, buried beneath the rubble. As Nathan emerged from the temple, breathing heavily, the weight of the final choice pressed on him. The treasure wasn't about wealth. It was about controlling history itself. And now, history would remain buried, with only the faintest whispers of its existence remaining. But one question still lingered in Nathan's mind. Had he made the right choice?